Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in again to the Naturalist Capitalist. As always, I'm your host, Reed Coverdale, and we've got Dave Spria back on the show. How's it going, Dave?
Pretty good, Reed.
Nice. We got Charles down in South Carolina. How's it going, Charles?
Oh, doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. And then we got Mike. And where in the country are you right now, Mike?
I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Oh, Baton Rouge, down at the end of the Mississippi River. Nice. So I guess the first thing we're going to talk about is Tulsi Gabbard, and I haven't talked about her on this channel for a while, but she's somebody we all have a common interest in. We all supported her candidacy for president. And she's sounding more like Tulsi Gabbard lately, I'd say. You know, she was talking about Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, and she was kind of breaking ranks with her, I don't know if you'd say her party or the left or whatever, the other yesterday when she came out denouncing Netflix for airing that Cuties movie that, you know, questionably has child pornography in it. So I just wanted to talk about Tulsi Gabbard in general. So Dave, you've your channel was dedicated to supporting Tulsi Gabbard when you first started it, and then when she dropped out, you kind of went through some stages of confusion, like we all did when she was supporting certain things and doing certain things. But your latest videos have been saying, like, after this election's over, you're maybe going to transition to having a channel fully devoted to just following her. And your latest video you just made, you're talking about petitioning her to run as an independent. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you know, part of this is, you know, there's not a lot of interest out there. I'm going to be quite honest with some of the other topics that I've tried to tackle. You go from having, you know, 5,000 views to, 100, if that. You know, if I get to triple digits, and I have a few subscribers. The subscribers have kind of leveled off, but so there's definitely something there when it comes to promoting Tulsi Gabbard. Giving it a lot of thought lately about why people like Tulsi Gabbard. And it really has to do, and you and I talked a little bit about this, Reed, prior to you going live here, is there's an independent streak there, and it's sincere. I mean, you know, to basically say that, hey, this Netflix documentary, as it's being called, she came out and said, you know, she used the word pedophilia. That's a big thing, believe it or not. You would think it's not because of the content. You would think it's kind of a Captain Obvious statement from Tulsi. But in today's political climate, where it seems, and, you know, you guys may disagree with me on this, it seems as though pedophilia is kind of like this, like, oh, no, we didn't really see any of that. I had one gentleman, I use that term loosely, over on Twitter, who said to me, you know, this was a documentary, and it would have been nice maybe if they didn't show the girls twerking. And I was like, oh, okay. And, you know, we have this back and forth, and I'm thinking to myself, is this person on the same planet that I'm on right now? Do they actually see the same thing that I saw? Or has the Overton window shifted so far over? And I do mean to the left, because honestly, that's where it's gone. There's no question about it. And if you're on the left and you're not seeing that, that's because you're complicit, as Tulsi said. They are complicit. So, yeah, Tulsi Gabbard to me on Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, the surveillance state in general, talking about civil liberties. Finally, she came out about a week or so ago, and she sent a tweet out talking about leaders in probably certain states that are putting in very draconian measures, probably more or less to fight COVID. And I think she finally sees, like, hey, there's another side to this. Tulsi was on the Trace Act, which it does drive me crazy. There's no question about that. But then she is speaking to the other part of this, saying, look, people are getting frustrated. Leaders, as she calls them, I don't know if they're leaders or not, but I think that's her diplomatic way to tell us something. And she said when they implement these types of measures, that the population becomes very frustrated. Go to any store right now where you've got your face diaper and you're fumbling around with it, and you're basically saying, okay, I need to breathe right now, so I'm going to slide it down a little bit. And everybody's doing it. So to me, once you see one violation, the whole thing is null and void. All right. I go to restaurants all the time. Okay. And I go into the restaurant, and the restaurants around here, they don't have those restrictions. Once you get in there, you sit down, you don't wear a mask. You eat your food. The aerosol is going everywhere, probably more so because you're eating and drinking. So I think a lot of people are getting tired of that. And I think Tulsi probably sensed it. But to this Netflix thing, this to me was a very, and it shouldn't be brave. I think there was another senator out in middle part of the country, Republican senator, who came out strongly against this as well. So again, Tulsi showing that she's willing to work with other people across the aisle. And honestly, guys, we need somebody who can get something done and who can bring the left and the right together. We really do. If you can peel some of those Democrats off, you'll appeal definitely to the middle, to the independents. And obviously, the Republicans like Tulsi Gabbard. They really do. They will say stuff like, yeah, some of her economic stuff and, some of this here and there, but they like her because she has character and she means what she says for the most part. Obviously, guys, that I didn't like the way she endorsed Biden. But note, when Harris was named as VP, Tulsi said nothing. She didn't make any comment on that. She could have said worst pick in the world, but her silence to me speaks volumes that she's not going to play the game, where everybody else, Mayor Pete's on there tweeting up a storm. Isn't this the greatest thing in the world? Yeah, Mayor Pete, because she's a deep state CIA op just like you, although she's a useful idiot, whereas you're actually in the CIA and so forth, so you know exactly what's going on. She's just going to play along. So yeah, I probably will be doing more Tulsi content. Some of it is based on the fact that people want to see it and they want to hear about it, and I'm filling, I'm doing a capitalist thing here, gentlemen. I'm finding an itch and I'm filling it.
Yep. There you go. Whatever the free market demands, you got to supply it somehow. So, Charles, I've been, I think, healthfully critical of Tulsi. People can't put me in a camp because I'm either a libertarian who likes Tulsi for some reason, even though she's a socialist gun grabber, or I'm a Tulsi hater who just despises everything about her and uses every little thing I can to demonize her. Those are what people mostly think of me, one of those two things, and I'm neither. I mean, I know her on a personal level from working with her in New Hampshire. I think she's a great human being. What I noticed on her campaign is that she is great. The people she put around her were not. So, I think she's very level-headed. She's very independent-minded. But the people who were running her campaign were Bernie Sanders people. It was far left vegan granola crunchers from Hawaii, that were running her campaign. So I was wondering what you think about her in the future. Would you be willing to support her again as a Democrat? What would it take for you to consider her again? Would she have to change course, or would she have to stop doing a certain thing? What are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Well, just to answer your question directly, and then I've got a little something I'll add to part of what David just said there. As far as Tulsi Gabbard's future, if she runs on a Democrat ticket, no, because the Democrat Party to me is dead in the water. They're corrupt. It's time for something different. Okay, that we've tried for 2 election cycles now to overtake the Democrat Party, right? And arguably this time we had worse failure than last time. At least last time Bernie was close, right? And there had to be a rigging that took place to keep him from getting a nomination, whereas this time you can argue there might have been some rigging that possibly took place behind the scenes. We saw the coin toss in Iowa, but without a doubt he got steamrolled. And yet these outsiders always endorse the people who have been the problem in the party. Even though Tulsi didn't endorse Kamala, she still had a lot of praise for Biden in her endorsement video for him. And I'm a lot like you there, Reed. People either believe back early on that I love Tulsi, but now I think everyone just assumes I hate Tulsi. Okay, right. And I don't. But I'm going to hold everyone accountable to what they do. And if you run a campaign on saying, you know, this is our problem, you call Hillary Clinton the queen of warmongers, but Joe Biden can lead with the spirit of aloha, how do you figure? Okay, that makes not a lot of sense to a guy like myself. And yet I could have criticized Bernie Sanders, and a lot of those quote unquote Tulsi-crats wouldn't have been pissed. They would have cheered me on for attacking Bernie Sanders from any way. Okay. Right. But the minute I have a critical word to say about Tulsi Gabbard, I'm drawn and quartered in the comment section on YouTube or on Twitter. Right. Okay. You can't go there. That's just, so for me to support her again, she would have to detach herself from the swamp, to use Donald Trump's quote. You've got to remove yourself from the problem for me to believe you're not just going to kowtow over in some way, shape, or form to the problem later on. So that's going to be step number one. To add to what David said there, since I'm kind of known for being the metaphor man here, okay? We're talking about how much sense does the country have right now? We were talking about why she got canceled with Netflix and the pedophilia thing, right? So David brought up the face masks and what Tulsi stands on the face mask. I'll tell a little story real quick, and I'll tie this back into where the common sense of the country is at. Where my wife works, she had a woman come into her store the other day wearing a homemade face mask. Now, the material that this face mask was made out of was lace. Okay? Lace. This thing was doing nothing to stop the spread of germs, but I guess it looked pretty, right? So she wore this thing into the store, and they told her, ma'am, you're going to have to put a face mask on because they're requiring masks in their store. And she said, well, I have a mask on. And they kind of proceeded to tell her, yeah, that mask is absolutely no good. Anything is just going to go right through that mask, right? Right. Her exact comment, according to my wife, was, well, if you won't let me express myself, I'll take my business elsewhere. So you're wearing this lingerie mask as an expression. Let me get that straight, okay? The amount of common sense that this lady has, I would equivalent it as about as much common sense as most of our society has at this point. And that's why they're okay with something like a pedophilia. And speaking of my wife, we actually had a conversation about 3 weeks back, maybe. And she is very much against this concept. She's been sharing a lot of stuff on her Facebook page against pedophilia. She's been seeing more and more of it, things like that. And I told her, I said, you understand that the problem is this is a result of escalation in this country. When we started breaking the norms in society and just started this liberal mindset that just caters to what everyone wants, there's never an end to it. And that's a problem, in my opinion, with a lot of the liberal mindset, is that when gay marriage wanted to become legalized, I have no issue with that. But at some point, you've got to put the foot down and draw the line in the sand and say, when is enough is enough. And the problem with the liberal mindset is that they do not want to offend anyone. And so the minute this gets legalized, here comes the next group saying, well, what about us? And like this guy or not, But Mark Dice did a hell of a job at exposing that years ago, going up and down the beaches in California. Now, he didn't focus on pedophilia, but what he focused on was incest. And he would ask these people, he would ask them, are you okay with gay marriage, this and that? Of course, they would say yes, and then he would get around to, okay, what's your opinion on two consenting adults if it was an incestual relationship? And you could tell immediately something in their mind almost wanted to say no, but they wouldn't. They would not say no because it was not politically correct, perhaps, right? So this escalation has gotten us to this point. David brought up, has the Overton window shifted that far? I wouldn't say left, but that far radical. And yeah, it has. Unfortunately, there's too many people, because of the society that we live in and the content so many people have consumed thanks to Hollywood. I look at it as a way, it has poisoned people's minds. We have no common sense, we have no reason, and we almost can't tell right from wrong anymore. And I really don't know what the solution is to fixing an entire society with a mind that's been that corrupted. I really don't know.
Yeah. So, Mike, there's actually been this thing called Unity 2020. I don't know if you've heard of it. And they're trying to get Dan Crenshaw and Tulsi Gabbard to run a Unity ticket, which is hilarious if you know anything about Dan Crenshaw. But I am sympathetic toward that type of idea. If there could be like a Rand Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, or Tulsi Gabbard, Justin Amash Unity ticket, I would totally go on board with that if I thought it could win in the future. If it was outside of the Republican and Democrat parties and it was like, okay, we agree on all these things, we're going to work together to figure out the things we disagree on. My current investment is in the Libertarian Party, but honestly, I don't think political parties should exist at all. So if something like that were to emerge, I would totally get behind that. What are your thoughts on something like that?
So it's interesting. I think a lot about when I think about Tulsi Gabbard. I've been following Dave's channel since he started it, probably about a month after he started it. So I know a lot of what his thoughts are about her, and I agree with a lot of them. I'm hesitant to get behind her because she seemed very short-sighted on what her campaign was about. I guess she wanted to bring on a new flavor of libertarian ideas, pro-civil liberties, but some kind of a Democrat light, or, but her focus was always on foreign policy, which was my favorite part about what she had to talk about. With regards to Dan Crenshaw, I don't know how to distinguish him from anyone else in the mix right now. I just don't know enough about him. My biggest complaint about Tulsi is she had a very difficult time gathering enough support. And that's a strong hurdle that she's going to have a hard time getting past. So, Ron Paul back in 2008 and 2012 had millions of supporters. He brought in millions of dollars of support, and he was a blip on the radar when it came to the Republican primary. He almost won Iowa. Some people say they ripped it right out of his hand, but Tulsi is a fraction of what Ron Paul got, and right. I don't see her building a coalition the same way that Ron Paul did, or, Rand did. But it's a funny thing. We've gone from Ron and Rand and a Tea Party movement and people thinking about fiscal responsibility and conservatives in the street holding signs saying we need to balance the budget, to where did that go, to now the only thing we can get excited about is a Democrat who's running with an anti-war platform, which used to be ubiquitous. You'd be able to find anti-war Democrats all over the place. So yeah. I have a hard time getting excited about Tulsi Gabbard 2024. Granted, if she started running again and I started listening to her talk at her town halls and everything, I'd probably be more on board than I am right now. But at the moment, I'm still licking my wounds from what she did in 2020. You know.
Yeah. No, I mean, just to clarify, because I never really stated my position, I would never support her as a Democrat ever again, for basically the same reasons Charles laid out. But also, looking at Rand Paul or Tulsi Gabbard, I think they are really good people, but their parties just hold them back to such a ridiculous amount. If they were set free from their parties, I think they'd be great. But especially Tulsi, she votes like 98% of the time with her party, and she does have like these independent streaks. But when you have something like COVID-19, she pretty much threw down along the party lines with every bill that's come through. And then there's just been a couple things she's spoken out about. That's kind of disappointing. I'm looking more for someone who is willing to always stand on principle, and you're never going to find someone who's perfect, but she did kind of surprise me with how quickly she folded with the COVID-19 thing coming through. But moving beyond that, we're going to talk about a few different subjects here, and this is actually a subject that if Tulsi wants my support in the future, she'll have to evolve on. So the first thing we're going to talk about is guns. I have been a gun owner for a long time, but I wouldn't say I've been a Second Amendment supporter for a long time, because in my mind, those are two different things. Like, the Second Amendment is what the purpose for guns is. I've owned guns because I've been a sportsman. I'm not a hunter, but I go target shooting a lot. So I've had guns for a while, but it wasn't until after Donald Trump won that I actually started to realize what the Second Amendment was really for. So I do think the Second Amendment is for defending yourself from crime and, people who wish to do you harm, but not just other criminals or people. It's also to maintain a healthy fear of the citizenry from the government. And we've seen why that's important over the last several months because the government has been very oppressive in lots of areas in different ways. So, Dave, what is your thought on the Second Amendment? You live in Florida. It's a pretty red state. They probably have pretty lax gun laws there. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I'm looking possibly to take a course pretty soon, and there's a good shot that by, I would say, this time next year, I might be owning my own firearm. And, and I'm not a guy who is, an outdoorsman or a sportsman or anything like that, but I'm starting to see the writing on the wall. I'm seeing some different things converge, which makes me think, well, at some point I might have to take matters into my own hands. You got people running around the country saying things like, hey, defund the police, or hey, let's turn the police into social workers, or and then they really don't have like a punchline for that other than, yeah, well, the police have kind of screwed up, so, we're just going to get rid of them. Okay. I mean, certainly there are remedies to that. We've talked on this show and at other times about how sensible police reform. I think Joe Jorgensen offers some pretty sensible ideas about that. And the libertarian perspective is a little of both, like, the armed but neutral thing, the Switzerland thing. And I think, you really, to have a good offense, you need a really good defense. Just ask any Super Bowl football team, they win on defense more than they do on offense. So I'm a guy who doesn't want to go on offense, but I'm being forced to take a look at going on defense. And I think as time goes on, you're going to find people who were probably either neutral or, yeah, I don't think the Second Amendment's a good idea because all these guns are, in the streets and they're everywhere, and people owning firearms, it means more people are going to get killed. I would say no, because if criminals know that the citizenry is armed, they're going to think twice about, entering someone's property. I think of that family in St. Louis there, the McCloskeys, and all of these people just pouring through the gates, and the media said, oh, it's a peaceful protest and it's going to be great. I'll tell you what, that's a very threatening sight in and of itself. Even if these people had firearms or not, you're like, why are thousands of people walking on our lawn? Why did they just bust down an iron gate? At that point, yeah, I might want to call 911, but then I might want to go grab my Smith & Wesson, because it's the right thing to do. It's my property. I feel threatened. I think these concepts are pretty intrinsic to what the First and the Second Amendment is all about. Freedom of speech. Yes, get off my property now, you whatever, At that point, I'm upset. The Second Amendment then kicks in because the First Amendment isn't really working in that case. And I think, someone smartly said the Second Amendment is there so we can have the First Amendment, kind of like a backup, So, yeah, society is breaking down, Reed. There's no question about it. And whether you're a prepper, whether you're somebody who's just always kind of looking over your shoulder, paranoid, and you just want to, this is what you do and this is what you've always done. What I think it's different now is that I'm finding out that women are buying guns in droves. Right. Because they think that, number one, well, if Biden becomes president, for instance, he's not going to protect me, and it doesn't seem like anybody really cares about my safety. And it's empowering to know that you can defend yourself, because, you're getting a lot of this, just these strange, crazy things that are happening in society. And you turn on the TV and it's almost unwatchable with some of the things that are happening in various cities around America right now. So if I'm a woman or if I'm just an average citizen and I want safety and I want security, and the government right now is failing to provide that safety and security because they're having this debate among themselves, well, should we have a police department or not? And whether that's just rhetoric or not, it was enough to scare the bejesus out of a lot of people. So everybody at this point is just saying, you know what, just let's be on the safe side. And whether we have a police department, we know in New York City, they did cut the budget to the police force, and crime there is up 300% last time I heard. So again, even if you're not in the city, if you're in the suburbs, my guess is once these people get through with the cities, they're coming to a suburb near you. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of the Second Amendment. I live in Southwest Florida. Most people here are acquainted with firearms.
Yeah. So Charles, I know you're a gun owner. A term that I've heard this year that I hadn't really heard before is Second Amendment absolutist, and that's what Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen are for sure. They think there should be like zero restrictions on owning firearms, which sounds crazy at first. And I remember there was this tweet that someone sent to Joe Jorgensen: will you do everything you can to make it legal for me to own an M1 Abrams tank? And she replied, yes. And everyone was like jumping on it like, oh, this is crazy. But what a lot of people don't realize is it's already legal to own an M1 Abrams tank. Why would you own one, though? Why would you go buy an M1 Abrams tank? Why would you go buy an F-15? Like, what possible purpose are you going to have for it? So I am not someone who's going to die on the hill of overturning background checks. I do think they're pretty ineffective, but it's not something I care about that much. Like, so what? Background checks. I do want to see reforms to like the no-fly list. I don't think that there should be a list you can be put on by some bureaucrat without due process that bars you from buying a gun or getting on an airplane. But I am pretty much a Second Amendment absolutist. I think we should be allowed to own automatic weapons. I think a semi-automatic weapon with 100 rounds is pretty much just as dangerous as an automatic weapon. Most of these shootings are precise, shootings in schools and things like that, where an automatic weapon isn't really going to make it that much more deadly. Well, I just wanted your opinion on the Second Amendment. Like, how far should it go? Do we need more restrictions? Should we have fewer? What's your thought?
So what I'll throw out there about that is most people's argument against the Second Amendment is when they say that, oh, it's the right of the people. They say, oh, well, read it. It says a well-regulated militia. I've heard that many, many times, right? So do I believe that anyone on their own should just be able to go buy rocket launchers? I mean, if you get proper permits and stuff, you can buy these things anyway, right? But here's the kicker, okay? What Dave brought up is our safety, where people are turning to firearms, right? And Dave brought up that the government is not providing that protection. So as a libertarian would fully understand, you're telling me the government has once again, even as big as they are, failed at doing their jobs like they do in every other category. They can't manage Social Security. They can't manage the VA. They can't manage the DMV. They can't manage the budget. They can't keep our noses inside of our own country. They can't build infrastructure. What can they do right? And they're certainly not providing your protection for you, which is why Ben Franklin said years ago, people who would sacrifice their freedom for their safety shall have neither, how do you put it? It's you shall have and deserve neither, or something like that, right?
They deserve neither, or they deserve neither and will receive something like that. Yeah,
or lose both, or whatever. Yeah. So the point being is the founding fathers knew what tyrannical government could do. And for the argument that why was it created, without a doubt, it was there to protect yourself from others and your government. Because when we fought the American Revolution, we were under British colonization, okay? And at the time, British troops could come into your house, occupy it, okay? You weren't allowed to really own a bunch of firearms to protect yourself. Granted, people had some for survival, but we weren't armed to the teeth to be able to fight the British. So that's why we had to get clever in that war, right? We didn't have the supplies that they had. So, of course, it was there for the tyrannical government aspect. So for the people who say that you shouldn't be able to own a tank, you shouldn't be able to own automatic weapons, you shouldn't be allowed to own rocket launchers, all these different things. Well, my protest to that's going to be, again, what does the language actually say? This is your own argument why we shouldn't. It says well-regulated militia. So here's my thing, okay? Our current military was put in place by who? Our government. Well, the Second Amendment was there as a check on the government should they become tyrannical. So what's to stop an actual well-regulated militia? Let's say we wanted to build a militia because we don't feel we're safe within the country anymore. Okay, we're going to train ourselves. We're going to make sure we can fire a firearm properly. We know how to use it properly. We're very well trained. Okay, what's to stop it if we wanted to form a militia for protection, just in case the government got oppressive, to stock up on these sorts of weapons so that if it happens, we can actually defend ourselves from it?
Right.
What I mean, to me, that makes perfect sense. And to me, that is completely constitutional. Okay. As far as for the argument of should the average citizen buy it? Well, first of all, I don't know in our current situation, the average citizen could afford it.
Right.
We can't buy new cars. How are we going to go buy a tank, right? So if someone bought it, it would probably have to be some rich guy, this and that. And of course, then we open up the argument that, you know, if some rich dude bought it completely unfiltered, unchecked, whatever, he could go rolling down Main Street one day blowing up buildings. I know what the argument's going to be. So that's why I would say when we're getting into especially heavy artillery, we should be allowed to form our own independent militias that are outside of the parameters of the United States military and own these sorts of weapons in the event that our government becomes so tyrannical that they try to oppress the people, which in a way they've already been doing for a long time anyway. So if we actually did that, I don't see where there's a constitutional argument that says we can't own these weapons.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. So Mike, I think one of the big issues in our country is the demonization of gun culture. So we've, we've demonized the ownership of guns while simultaneously pushing all these violent movies, violent video games. So kids who used to grow up shooting in the backyard no longer have that experience anymore. They grow up without a gun, and their only experience is on TV or on their video game blasting away bad guys. So then if they become an adult and they buy a gun, that has been their entire experience related to firearms. And it gives a very unhealthy and unrealistic expectation. It's kind of like pornography for a single guy who ends up getting married. Like, it gives you unrealistic expectations. It's a very similar scenario. Do you think that's part of the problem?
Yeah, there's something there. As someone who, don't tell anyone, but I don't actually own a firearm. I've never. I think it's important that we have the right to do it. And if I was in elected office, I would definitely be very pro Second Amendment. And, I understand the argument. It's all about trying to protect us from, enemies, foreign and domestic. And if that means it's to chase the government official off your lawn, that's probably part of it, regard to what you're talking about, demonizing gun culture in America, that's been going on for a while. I mean, I remember a time when their violence in video games was the hot topic amongst conservatives, and they were all up in arms about, blood in video games, and, how we're demonizing our youth and teaching them all the horrible things of violence. But now you can go on Call of Duty and, in a realistic battle and shoot, your friend.
Yeah.
It's a big development, But, I bet all these games are backdoor funded by military trying to get people interested in going out there and shooting people, because, the government, politicians aren't going to go there and run battlefields and face off our enemies. We've got to get the poor to do it. So let's go teach them how to do it with video games, so that when they finally get out there, they might be worth something.
Yeah.
That's kind of my feeling about it,
Yeah, I wouldn't feel that the violent video games are necessarily bad in themselves. It's just when you have a vacuum of no actual relationship to firearms in real life, and then that becomes your visualization of what it's like to shoot. It would be like if you were never around cars growing up, if you were never allowed to move the car in the driveway until you're a 20-year-old, and then you've been playing all these racing games and you've been watching all these race car movies, and then you just jump in the car, and that's your entire idea of what driving a car is about, because you haven't been riding one growing up, seeing other people use them, seeing how the real world works. It's a fantasy that becomes reality, basically, when you don't have the actual practice in your life. Next thing we're going to talk about is drugs. I personally abhor drug use, and I'm not even a fan of marijuana unless someone needs it for medical reasons on a personal level, because I know people who smoke marijuana and they say it's not addictive, it doesn't affect me at all. Their life does not reflect that being true. But I don't think it's the government's job to enforce morality on other people. I think in certain areas it makes sense. Like Mike and I are truck drivers. I don't think we should be allowed to be high while we're operating a vehicle. That makes sense. But when you turn it into a crime to put something into your own body that is punishable by being imprisoned or being arrested or ending up with a record that makes it hard for you to get a job, that's where I think it's wrong. And that's why I'm not just for decriminalization, I'm for legalization, because decriminalization, but heavily regulating them will still lead to lawsuits, will still lead to run-ins with police officers. I'm against that. I think that it should just be unregulated, and I think it should be treated as a health issue instead of a criminal activity in general. So, you know, I think you should be allowed to sell marijuana to other people. I don't see why that, I don't see what's so controversial about that. Because if you decriminalized it, you still technically wouldn't be supposed to sell it. And so you're still leaving an opportunity for law enforcement to get involved. I think there should be laws, you know, regarding age. You know, I think 18 should be the cutoff, or you shouldn't be allowed to sell to children, things like that. But in general, I don't look at it as something the government should have much involvement with. So you're probably of a similar mindset on the personal level too, Dave. You don't seem like a toker to me. I could be wrong, but
You've watched my videos, I see.
So yeah, what's your thought on the whole drug deal?
Yeah, you know, I've evolved on this quite a bit. If you asked me this 20 years ago, I would have said, nah, because you look at a lot of citizens and they're walking around, and you would hope that they wouldn't be walking around stoned and doing things and driving cars and so forth, but they are. So you have to, I think, look at it in a couple of ways. I think you need a two-pronged approach here. Certainly, as you mentioned, decriminalization is a better word than just legalizing, because again, if your goal here is less jail time, less incarceration, and just less overhead. In other words, we've lost the drug war. So let's just throw that out there. We've lost it. We lose it every year. We fight this war and we don't win it. Okay, and you've heard for years that, hey, both the left and the right, but more on the right, say we need to fight harder. If you're old like me, you remember Ronald Reagan and his lovely wife, Nancy, who said, just say no. And that was going to solve all the problems. Well, it may have made it kind of cool not to do drugs and so forth, may have made it a little more interesting for younger folks, in a sense that they were hearing a message of abstinence on drugs. But you got to look at like things like prohibition. How did that go? You know, did that work out really well? And again, then you get into the arguments, sort of the vagaries of, is pot a worse substance than alcohol? Alcohol causes all these problems. There aren't a lot of people that crash their cars stoned and driving out of their minds. If anything, they drive slower and more paranoid. You know what I'm saying? So it's a different effect. Now, it is a health issue, as you mentioned, and it's got to be more cost efficient, right, than fighting this war on drugs where you're constantly in the streets with drug dealers and so forth, and you're along the southern border trying to intercept drugs, and a lot of and then we're going to have this argument about things like cocaine and things like heroin and that's kind of an interesting debate, and I'm curious to find out what other people think on that level. I mean, some of those substances are pretty lethal and very, very addictive, to the point where you got people lying in the gutters surrounded by needles, and this is their life and they can't get out of it. Is it more cost effective to say to those people, hey, we're gonna, and in some cities they do this, they have needle programs and they go out there and they say, just go for it, we're gonna set up a nice clean environment for you, we're gonna give you the needles. I think when government is doing that, they are in a sense sort of assisting, sort of enabling is a better word. They're enabling people rather than helping them clean up and get their lives together. Because look, heroin, cocaine, and some of these other, there's a lot of stuff on the streets that I couldn't name to you because I'm just not into the drug culture. They all have kind of unique, pretty names and so forth that these people throw on things. It is a public health crisis, and the issue I think I have is there a point of like where you say, okay, this is good. I think we all agree that cannabis is probably good for the most part. I mean, I don't see any downside to cannabis. Although I'm sure you could have like a Bill Bennett come in and lecture me and tell me why cannabis is still bad and we should just not encourage any drug use. And then he's going to have to convince me why we need to ban alcohol after he does that. So, but the point being is that and again, I'm like you, Reed. I'm not a drug user whatsoever. I'm kind of afraid of drugs. I don't know. I've had a sort of a weird paranoia since I'm a kid. Plus, I don't like to smoke anything. I don't like to bring any smoke into my lungs. And if, I know there are other ways now to get your THC fix, and maybe I would enjoy that. But for now, I'm just not into smoking anything. But I think the real debate going forward is the difference, as you mentioned, between just legalization and making this not a criminal offense, because we've got prisons that are filled up with people who are nonviolent offenders. And I know you've had some prison reform. I think you need more radical prison reform. And you need to look at this as a cost savings. And police officers, by the way, can get back to doing real work instead of trying to bust somebody for a little bag of marijuana in their car. But, you know, I throw this back out to you guys, and I don't know what your question would be to Charles and to Michael, but I mean, at what point do we say, okay, this is okay, but, you know, you got cocaine and heroin over here? You know, I'm a little standoffish on that. I'm a little skittish on, you know, they asked Tulsi Gabbard one time, not to bring her into this, but I think it was Sean Hannity that asked her, and she couldn't. It was really not a good Tulsi moment, because he kept asking, and she kept saying, she deflected, and she doesn't usually deflect. But I think Tulsi's inner position might be to, just legalize everything, and then, you know, we'll treat it as a public health issue. But do those costs start to go so far up that you, again, want to go back to fighting a drug war? And then you've got a citizenry that can't function. Look at the streets of San Francisco and Oakland, Seattle, Portland, and you're going to see needles all over the streets. And that's, to me, that's when it gets to like, okay, I can't sign on to that.
Okay. So, Charles, I don't know if you're a Christian. I know Dave is. And something I argue with a lot of Christians about is that they say if there were no God, that we'd all go start raping people and killing people. Oh, that's like that's an argument a lot of the time. I don't think that's true. I don't think if we legalized heroin, and similarly, I don't think if we legalized heroin tomorrow that you would start to see droves of people going to do it. I think, you know, heroin is obviously a very dangerous, addictive, deadly substance, but so is tobacco, and so is alcohol. We have all these other things that are very dangerous that kill thousands of people every year, and really painful and terrible ways. But we don't illegalize those. You know, we go after heroin and cocaine. So what are your thoughts? My thoughts are just legalize it all, because I think the more criminal outlines you put on any sort of substance, it's going to encourage people, if they have an overdose or something, not to call for help. It's going to encourage people to stay in the shadows. It's going to encourage them to not look for help because they'll be fearing the legal repercussions of what happens to them. So what are your thoughts? What do you think about all that?
You're absolutely correct, and I'll give you a little bit of personal story on that. But one thing I'll say, starting off with this: video games, guns, drugs, what do they all have in common? They can become very, very bad for your life and your health if you don't use them properly. Okay, if you're an idiot with guns, you could kill other people or kill yourself. If you don't have an actual life and you devote your life to video games, you could become crazy. I mean, you know, and if you're consuming violent video games potentially from too young of an age, in other words, if it's not used responsible, has bad outcome. Same thing with a pot smoker. Okay, if you don't have it, you know, balanced, if you devote your whole life to just smoking pot day and night, you're not going to be a productive member of society. But there are people who can function and come home and just smoke pot at night. It's all about how responsible you are with what you're doing. Now, the problem with why we see the issue with heroin and meth and things like that we see around us, and crack, okay? I'm not going to put cocaine quite in there with the rest of those. And the reason why is same thing with marijuana, okay? It's so much cheaper to get your hands on those street drugs than it is for marijuana or cocaine. They're far more pricey, okay? Not only that, but we've got what people refer to as the opioid pandemic, right? Where you're getting these pills from a doctor who get you all strung out and high kind of, and if you get hooked on these things but you can't get refills and prescriptions, you're probably going to turn to street drugs because you've now become hooked. So I'll give you a little personal story here, okay? I used to smoke marijuana. I don't anymore. It's illegal, okay? I tried cocaine one time. Now here's where things are going to become problematic for me at the time. You got to have money to buy pot. Now, I wasn't 18 when I was doing this, so not even having a job quite yet. That was not the easiest thing in the world to come by, but I was able to find someone who could get their hands on pills. Now, what I'm referring to is anything from Klonopin, Oxycontin, Percocet, Xanax, Loratabs. I was taking a variety of them because I couldn't get my hands on pot anymore, and I enjoyed getting high. Now, I broke away from that, but not a lot of people do. But the point here being is that because pot is so hard to, even though we hear about so many people smoking it, if you don't have the money to buy it, and keep in mind, a little bit of money, unless you're buying trash, which most people don't want, they want to try to get the good stuff, right? A little bit requires a lot of money. When you compare it to things like fentanyl, heroin, meth, all these different little street drugs here, that's why they call marijuana the gateway drug. And as things stand right now, it's true. If you get started on that and you enjoy the process, but then you run into a budget or a money crisis and don't quite have the money, you'll try something cheaper to see how it turns out. Then you're on the road to disaster if you don't get off it soon enough. Okay, because you're going to keep taking those because it's easier on your budget, and then you get hooked. Now you're in big trouble. Okay, so if you legalized things like marijuana, just like there's not as many people buying alcohol from questionable sources anymore. Sure, there's still people who buy backwoods moonshine, right? But since we ended prohibition, there's a lot more people who will just go to the liquor store and buy Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, Absolute, whatever, okay? They'll buy something that's still not good for your body, but not as risky because it's actually legal now. I can go buy something I know that I can trust, okay? So that's going to happen when you legalize marijuana or cocaine, and the price can come down because there's not a war on the drug at that point. Once the price becomes cheaper, why would anyone have a reason to go buy meth or heroin? Sure, there's going to be some who would still be stupid enough to go do it, but for the most part, people aren't going to have to turn to those options anymore. Okay, they're not going to need to go buy something so risky. And as far as the federal government having their war on drugs, remember this. With our war in Afghanistan, okay, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, they put the poppy growers out of business. Poppy is the main ingredient used in heroin production. As soon as they put the poppy growers out of business, a lot of laundered money started drying up in the international banks. And as soon as that happened, we hit a recession. Shortly after that, we got involved into Afghanistan. And since we got involved into Afghanistan, poppy production has went right back up full swing, and now we're hearing about the war on drugs and the heroin issue and fentanyl in this country, which again, poppy being a main ingredient in heroin. So for our own government to say these things are too dangerous to legalize, I don't find it coincidental that once our government got involved in a war, the main ingredient of heroin started to be grown again. So we've got our hands tied into this, even though we're kind of getting kind of deep state and conspiratorial here Our own government has probably more of a hand in drug trade than we even realize. And certainly they've got their pockets lined by the big tobacco companies, by the alcohol companies, and they're afraid of marijuana becoming legalized because people might not smoke as many cigarettes. There's a lot of things here. The biggest thing it's going to impact, though, is big pharma.
Right.
Because it's far better in the medicinal column than a lot of those other aforementioned pills we were just talking about a moment ago. Okay. So there's a lot of reasons why the government doesn't want this to be legalized, because it's what their donors don't want. But as far as the argument that if we legalize it, it's going to push more people toward meth and heroin, I simply don't believe that. And I think prohibition showed us that when we ended the war on alcohol. It didn't encourage more people to go buy questionable liquor. So it's not going to push people to go buy more questionable drugs. They'll go with the one they know is the least dangerous and not as likely to get you hooked. And I think that would be the case if they were to legalize it.
Yeah. So Charles brought up a lot of good points there. I think there's a glaring similarity between the war on guns and the war on drugs, mostly because both of them have completely failed. The other thing that's ironic, though, is our government telling us that we're not allowed to have guns or that we're not allowed to sell drugs. Those two things our federal government telling to us are absolutely hilarious. So, Mike, what a lot of people say is these are good-intentioned policies with bad results. I tend to agree more with Dave Smith that these were not well-intentioned policies. These policies were meant to fuel mass incarceration, to benefit pharmaceutical companies, to benefit the military-industrial complex. What's your thought? Do you think these are all nefarious ideas, or do you think the government's just really stupid?
That's a good way. Good point. My thoughts are, with regard to drugs, it's not the government's job to legislate morality, and that's really between you and your creator. And personally, for me, I don't smoke, I don't take pills, I don't do anything. I might drink alcohol every now and then, but it's only a drink or two. I find it, I don't even take Tylenol if I have a headache. I was one of those kids who was put on Ritalin for a very long period of time. So I have a unique perspective on a lot of these topics, just because it was such a big part of my life for a very long time. I think they're selling help, but they're not actually curing anybody. They're selling people on on a money stream for them, and that's how big pharma owns patients and maintains their shareholders' value based on all of the mechanics of our medical system right now. So there's a lot of overreaching effects, and I think ending the war on drugs is the right position to take, and there's going to be repercussions all over the world if we are ever able to pull it off. What was your other question? I forgot.
It was if it's intentional or if the government's just stupid with these policies. Do you think it's intentionally trying to enslave its population through incarceration and buying drugs from pharmaceutical companies that they otherwise wouldn't need? Or do you think they're just really, really dumb? Or both?
I think it's hard because there's a lot of different players involved, and some of them are probably nefarious, and some of them are probably just, fear-driven. Some of them are, purely conspiratorial, and, some of them just go along to get along because that's not their primary issue. So, there's a lot of different players. With regards to the different factions, I think I've heard stories that, one of the biggest drug importers into this country is the CIA.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any truth to that, but there's certainly a whole lot more drug production going on in Afghanistan right now than there was prior to U.S. getting involved in that side of the country. So, there's a lot that goes on, between the CIA, the Pentagon, DEA. There's so much money tied up in all of this. In many ways, the government is what keeps these prices high on the street, because people had to work very hard to get it into this country and sneak it across the border and hide it into things. If it was just available at CVS, maybe just maybe, it wouldn't be such a big deal, but there's other repercussions going on too. The human health crisis. There's a lot of people who don't understand their place in the world, and they're turning to these drugs to try to fill a hole. So, maybe that's something that we should be considerate of. And maybe rather than putting people in jail, we should try to help them find their place in the world, And like I said, it's not the government's job to legislate morality. Maybe we need to find a way to create a morality in these people, and unity, and something to look forward to, and a job, and a career, and a life, so that you're not just wasting away on a couch, falling asleep, passing out because you're strung out on something,
Yeah. So the last subject we're going to talk about, we've kind of touched on a little bit here and there, is Trump wanting to withdraw troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. So, Dave, in my opinion, late is better than never. But this seems at this point just a ploy for re-election to fulfill a campaign promise. I mean, this should have been happening in January of 2017. And I realize Congress has been trying to block Trump in a lot of ways, but he doesn't need Congress to remove troops from Afghanistan and Iraq because the AUMF was just to fight al-Qaeda, to take out an immediate threat. There's no declaration of war that has us fighting those sovereign countries. So there's no congressional authority to keep us there if he wants to pull them back. So if he wins re-election, I'm not even sure we'll see it happen. I think it's just he's just kind of throwing a gesture to the people who voted for him. See, I am going to do what I said I was going to do. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with your take on that, Reed. I think it's really, I'm going to be honest here. I don't know right now the way the government is structured, and all of these sort of, you call them deep state operatives for lack of a better term, career military people that work at the Pentagon. I kind of think they rule the roost. And if Trump says, yeah, we're going to pull troops out, they know that he's not going to be able to accomplish that. And I do mean that. And I'm not saying it's, hey, I'm not taking any blame away from Donald Trump, because he could have been working on this since he got into office. One of the reasons I liked Trump when he ran was he had some pretty sincere anti-war rhetoric. I remember him looking down the Bush family and saying, you guys did this Iraq war thing, and it was stupid, in his words. I will give Trump some credit for the other day literally saying that these generals want to continue to blow things up or to fight. I can't remember it's Trump phraseology, so it was basically a lot of bluster, but that's unusual. That's dangerous talk for a president. And, does he mean it? I think he means it, but I don't think he's really put any teeth behind it. I was really disappointed when Trump launched the missile attack in Syria when he first became president. And one of the commentators on MSNBC, he was reciting some poetry as the missiles went off, and looking like it was a Francis Scott Key moment or something. And I'm sitting there going, what? And this is, at that moment, I became detached from Donald Trump, literally. I said, nope, nope. I mean, this guy just completely, and whether it was Jared Kushner or people say Ivanka Trump or Ivana, whatever her name is, it was Ivanka, I think, right? Or the daughter. So I'm, to answer your question, I think a lot of this is a dog and pony show now until we can really come to grips with the fact that there is a deep or shadow government which is controlling the military and runs the show. I mean, his general there, Mad Dog Mattis, is apparently really upset with Trump for just saying these things. And I heard last week that they were thinking about a coup early on with Trump, trying to just get him out of there because he was saying crazy stuff. So, we hear a lot about systemic problems like systemic racism. We've got systemic militarism within our government, and until people understand that, no matter who you put up there, and again, Trump is a bad actor. Okay, he's a really bad actor, and there's no question in my mind that he does a lot of things just because he's like running the greatest show on earth, the Ringling Brothers circus. I think he meant the stuff he said in the debates before he became president. I think he meant that stuff, but once he became president, I think it was just all for to get some of us who aren't neocons to say, you know what, this guy is more anti-war. At least his rhetoric is more anti-war, and I appreciate the rhetoric, but it's not going anywhere. I mean, you really look at troop levels, and somebody schooled me on this the other day, and I said, yes, you're correct. We really haven't changed troop levels all that much in any of the theaters that we're currently in. Right. So you could say, yes, we're pulling troops out of Afghanistan. You could say it 100 times, but then you analyze the numbers and you go, no, they actually moved troops from one location to another location to make this location look less, and the other location now has more. And, of course, you're still, he was saber rattling hard against Iran for quite some time. Pompeo was saying, we're going to get in there, we're going to do something. You declare their army, their standing army, a terrorist organization, and you just so you could say, hey, we're going to go fight some terrorists over in Iran now. We're going to redesignate. It's like you could go around the world to every government and say, these people in China, they're all terrorists. We're going to go over to China and take them out now. And it's like kabuki theater is what it is. And even with Tulsi Gabbard or any candidate who's got kind of an anti-war message, whether it's Joe Jorgensen or Howie Hawkins, it's comical. They've got to say to me, the first thing we need to do is clean house at the Pentagon. And I mean clean house. And I mean you need Congress on board. You need the country on board. And right now, Reed, there's no political will for any of it. None. Zero.
Yeah. So Charles, what we criticize the Democrats a lot, and they deserve it, but the Republicans kind of get a pass on consistency a lot of the time, and I don't think they should. So right now Trump's talking about troop withdrawals, and they're all excited. But 9 months ago, they were beating the war drums to go take out Iran, like Dave just alluded to. And then the other thing is they almost go with Trump's rhetoric more than his actions. So, Trump just has to say the United States will never be a socialist country. He said that at the State of the Union address, but then a couple months later, he signed the largest redistributive bill in world history, and he's run the highest deficits ever. So, it's all about optics. It has nothing to do with what is actually going on. So when I try to talk to these people, Republicans, about like, hey, what do you actually believe in? Oh, small government, bringing our troops home. It's like, okay, why are you behind Trump then? But we can't even have a real conversation about what's going on because people are not on par with reality. Have you noticed that case too?
Oh God, I mean, people are about as in touch with reality since we just got off the topic of drugs. You'd think they had just taken a good trip of LSD, because that's the reality they see, not the reality that's actually there.
Right.
I will say this. You brought up, why do we not hold the Republicans' feet to the fire more for consistency? To be fair, the Republicans were very consistent in the war column pre-Trump. Okay, it was the Democrats who constantly said we want out of the war, and then we elected a Democrat president, House, and Senate, and went from 2 conflicts into 7.
Right.
Okay, at least the Republicans the whole time were saying, yeah, blow up the Muslims. Okay, that's where the Republican stance was the entire time, so we knew what they wanted. Okay, and David brought up Mad Dog Mattis. Remember, this is the same guy who has been going on the record for saying that it's fun to shoot him. And also in an interview on CNN went something along the lines of, I think Wolf Blitzer asked him, did he ever experience like terror or fear or something? And his response was, I don't experience terror and fear. I cause terror and fear.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So, wow, what a great guy we're talking about here, right? And so here's my problem with Donald Trump being some kind of anti-war candidate. He put Mad Dog Mattis, John Bolton, and Mike Pompeo all around him. Now, granted, 2 of the 3 aren't with him anymore, okay? But that has to raise the question, if you really wanted out of war, why did you put these war hawks around you in the first place? Okay,
Right.
I guess the only logical answer is, well, I'm anti-war, so maybe let me hear the pro-war voice so I get both sides of the argument and see where I fall after it. Well, that's dumb, okay? Because even you acknowledged yourself in the debates that the whole pro-war argument was not the right way to go at this point. We made too many mistakes.
Right.
A lot of people have questioned why we didn't get into another war under a Trump administration. Now, maybe I'm reaching here. I could be completely wrong, but if I had to take a guess as to why we haven't wound up in another war, I'd venture to say we're pretty much spread about as thin as we can get. Okay, because our economy in-house isn't that great. Most of our manufacturing is meant to supply the war machine anyway. Okay, they make the uniforms, they make the supplies, they make the weapons. Okay, that's what a lot of our manufacturing does at this point in this country, and yet we still don't get much wage growth. The people aren't able to spend more. Okay, so honestly, because of the amount of debt we keep racking in just from that alone, not to mention what we've had during COVID, I don't really know how we could get our noses into many more conflicts without experiencing some kind of complete collapse. I think we've just about reached our limit at this point, okay? We're still somewhat involved with Syria. I'm sure we've still got something going on in Iraq. Here's the thing on Afghanistan. If you really think Trump's going to pull out of Afghanistan, no. You're absolutely right. This is a ploy to try to win votes right before election because most polls show him falling to Biden.
Yes.
Okay. So this is his way of trying to reel you back in and kind of give you the 2016 talk again. He's
Right.
trying to sound more like the Donald Trump that won the last election, which he hasn't been doing for a lot of this cycle. Okay. That being said, we have this tension with China. Honestly, us and China are kind of like a modern day Cold War, okay? Even though we still hear the Democrats talk about the Russians, China is our big adversary at this point, okay? We can't reach a trade deal with them. We're always playing one-ups over here, okay? China has access to Afghanistan for their minerals. And they found things in Afghanistan like lithium and all these different minerals, things that can really be used. It's very valuable. And what you figure out about our history with the military is we always get into something where we think we're going to stand to gain something out of it. Okay? Now, Donald Trump himself said that we should not have left Iraq without taking the oil. So if Afghanistan has all these minerals and lithium and everything else going off Donald Trump's own rhetoric from the past, why is he going to leave Afghanistan without procuring all these different things that would be very beneficial to our own economy if we got control of them, right? That doesn't stand to reason, and it doesn't line up with his own words of the past. So, like you said, hold the Republicans accountable here. I'm taking this from the man's own words and the things that I heard. So, that being said, no, Donald Trump is, in my opinion, absolutely just doing this until he gets reelection. Once he gets reelection, understand this, if he does roll true, I don't think he'll completely withdraw. What you might see is a rollback of troops, right? And if we did see something like a complete withdrawal, out goes the U.S. military and in goes the modern day Blackwater Academy, okay? You know, that U.S. private military. They'd go right in behind us so that we're still keeping up our actions just without actually having the real military on the ground at that point. They're not letting Afghanistan go simply because the Chinese already have too much access to those minerals, and we've got to compete with them. But if we did draw our military out, and you mark my words, if we're not having to completely use them in Afghanistan, then you probably would see another war start. They'd either really get to war with Assad and Syria. Watch there be another gassing of the people in Syria the minute we pull out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
About guarantee you it would happen.
Yeah. No, we're on the exact same page there. So, Mike, you and I did a video about this a little while ago. I think it was after Rand Paul's speech at the RNC. I actually think the credit for not attacking Iran goes to Rand Paul because, he was directly in line with Trump when that whole thing was happening. And it seems almost like he talked him out of it. Obviously, we don't know everything that happened behind the scenes. But the point I made to you in the video that we made a few weeks ago is that the Republican Party is no more anti-war than the Democratic Party. We have Trump, who has zero political philosophy, so we can sometimes get something sort of positive out of him. But not just the party officials, the electorate of the Republican Party as a majority is still fully fine with going to war. And we saw that with the Soleimani airstrike in January. I mean, they were beating the war drums ready to go. So there was a faction of the progressive left that really liked Barack Obama a lot because of the things he was talking about. And they even gave him a second shot in 2012. They voted for him again. But after that, they were like, screw you, I'm done. You completely turned your back on me. I'm wondering if that's going to happen with the Republicans too, because there is an anti-war faction of the Republican Party, or, they might be libertarian leaning, but they don't consider the Libertarian Party viable. What I hope happens is if Trump wins re-election, I am confident we're just going to see more of the same for the next 4 years. I'm hoping those people finally realize, okay, this guy sold us. He sold us a lie and we bought it. And I'm hoping that the groups, the disenfranchised groups from both sides can come together and say, okay, look, we agree on everything important. We need to put an end to this. Let's do it. Do you think they'll do that, or do you think that they're just going to Republican harder, kind of like Tulsi's Democrating harder now, to try to change the party from the inside? Or do you think they're going to finally be like, okay, this isn't going anywhere? How do you foresee it all playing out?
Well, I've often thought Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, they're in the business of incremental change, and they want pride to work within the party and the party structure, try to move us in the right direction. It's a long, slow haul. might get there eventually. We might not get there, but we're going to try. And, you know, more power to them. I think we need more people in office doing stuff like that. The question becomes, you know, how much longer do we have to wait? You know, we're running out of money. Things are falling apart left. I'm still of the mindset that we would be much better off today had we elected Ron Paul in 2008. You know, how many wars would we be in right now? What would our stance to the COVID-19 crisis be? You know, it's so hard to think about, you know, how radical were his positions. He wanted to end the IRS. He wanted to end the war on drugs. He wanted to end the war overseas. You know, these are ideas that a lot of people can get behind. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard for me to see where all this is going. You know, I think Trump's going to win, you know, in November. You know, I've been going back and forth a lot on it, but, you know, if he manages to pin all of the COVID-19 stuff on the Democrats and the Democrat governors, because they seem to be the ones who are rallying for a shutdown, and it's, you know, and I think COVID-19 will disappear when the election comes around. If, you know, unless not, you know, if Trump wins, maybe they'll try to shut everything down again. We'll see. You know, regards to the war stuff, you know, I was really disappointed with the people that Trump surrounded himself with, because he ran with a pretty anti-war agenda when he ran in for office. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's kind of my.
Yeah. No, I don't know. In 2016, I never took him seriously as anti-war because he did say things about like the war in Iraq and 9/11 and the Bush family. But then he also said, like, I'm going to bomb the shit out of them. We're going to kill the terrorists' families so that they know we mean business. You know, he's like, we're going to bring torture back. We're going to do all this stuff. Like, to me, he was never very libertarian or much of a peace candidate in my mind. Compared to Hillary Clinton, I completely understand the obvious difference, though.
That's a low bar to jump over, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's our show right there. We'll just close out with just a few seconds from each person. So, Dave, who's going to win in November?
If you're going to ask me tonight, and this may change in a week or two, so you'll have to tune in to find out in a week or two how I'm feeling. I'm going to go with Joe Biden, believe it or not. I just think that there's just so much going on that's negative, and whether that's on Trump or not, I think people just assume we need to change horses. I would say COVID-19 isn't Trump's fault, but they're certainly going to be able to pin that on him because of his comments about, oh, it's going to go away by April and so forth. And, you know, Trump shoots his mouth off, and sometimes it doesn't work to his favor. In the past, he's been able to recover from it. 2020 is a different year, though. It's a different year. Of course, you do have the factor of these riots or peaceful protests, as some people call them, which could certainly impact the election and put it in Trump's column. But those cities are all going to foolishly vote for Biden anyway. So no matter, even if they burn their own cities down, those cities are going to come out and vote for the group that burned their city down. Sounds great to me, right? So yeah, unfortunately right now, and honestly, I do like Trump better than Biden. Maybe because I voted for him in 2016. Maybe because I think he has some kind of like pro-America kind of. I don't mind the American flag, and I don't mind patriotism. These are things that I, as an American citizen, I like living in this country. I'm tired of hearing of how bad it is all the time. But these are two really lousy choices, guys. And from a political standpoint, though, if I'm looking at the horse race right now, which I hate doing, I'd have to say Biden by a nose right now.
All right. Charles, who's going to win the House? Are the Democrats going to keep it, or are the Republicans going to take it?
hard to say. But I'll tell you what. I know who's going to win overall in November. You want to take a guess?
Not really.
China.
The Russians.
The Russians.
The Russians. No, being serious though for a second.
But
Between Trump and Biden, I'm kind of right there with Dave. The only reason I don't want to count Trump out, though, the man has defied what conventional wisdom would say is his ending time after time.
True.
The only problem, though, is remember, Trump did lose the popular vote last time around. The only reason he won was because of the Electoral College, and I do think that there's a lot of swing voters who probably aren't going to take the Trump train the second time around. So even though he might have good Republican turnout, I don't know that swing voters will come out for him as they did last time, which could cost him the Electoral College. That being said, as far as who's going to take the House or the Senate, I'll say this, and I still say we're all in unison. I think we all are aware of what kind of a miracle it would be for this to happen, considering we still have no word of Joe Jorgensen landing inside the debates, and it's probably not going to happen at this point, considering they've already been announced, right? But we would need Joe Jorgensen obviously to be elected, but we really need someone besides Democrats and Republicans in the House and Senate. But there's one thing for certain. It doesn't matter if it's Republicans or Democrats who take the House or the Senate. Whoever wins, we know for damn sure who the losers are, and that would be all of us.
That's correct. All right, Mike, last question to you. What is going to cause more upheaval if Biden wins or if Trump wins re-election? Which one results in more outcry in the streets, do you think?
Boy, that's a tough one. We all saw what happened when Trump won 2016. So I think the Democrats are a little more livid than the Republicans are. They're probably a lot more whiny, and the Republicans are probably more well armed. So
probably
something to consider, but we'll see what happens. I'm waiting in anticipation of what's going to happen in November, and I'm also kind of dreading it because who knows what road bumps will come.
Yeah.
2020's been a year for firsts. I don't know where people are at with their apocalypse bingo, but we've had hell freezing over, we've had wildfires, we've had, I heard somebody talking about earthquakes up in Yellowstone. So who knows? Maybe there'll be a super volcano. Maybe a giant meteor will fall down, and that'll be what all those T-shirts we're talking about, right? Giant meteor 2020, right? I don't know. I'm a cynic right now, and I don't think we're gonna win any headway as far as liberty goes. But the fight goes on, and I'm still gonna be placing my vote for Joe Jorgensen. I already signed up for my absentee ballot, so I'm sure it will be counted.
There you go. Yeah. Just for the record, everyone, I did make a video about this a couple weeks ago, but I give Trump slight favorability to win, even though I've been saying Biden up to this point. But we're running at like an hour and a half now, so we'll close it out. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks to all you guys for coming back on. We'll do it again.